Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded in St. Louis, Missouri, now here's your host, Aaron Perlett of Atomic Junk Shop.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlett. The indie rock band Carbon Leaf has been at it since the early 1990s when they got their start in the Richmond, Virginia area, which used to be my neck of the woods, and they are best known for their 2004 hit Life Less Ordinary. In late September, they released their much-anticipated new record, Time is the Playground, which is the band's first full-length album in a decade. Welcome Barry Privett, one of the band's founders, to the show. Barry, what's happening, man?
Hey, Aaron, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Before we started, you and I were kind of catching up on Old Home Week. When you guys were coming up as a band I guess you were at Randolph-Macon, and then you kind of started playing there. I know you were kind of even using like an auditorium to rehearse in while you guys were in college, about 20 minutes north of Richmond. But then obviously you guys became an integral part of the Richmond music scene, and at the time it was a really fascinating music scene to me, at least, because there were you guys and this little band called the Dave Matthews Band, which I think, they played like it was either every Wednesday or Thursday night at the Flood Zone.
Yes, Tuesday or Wednesday. They played either Tuesday or Wednesday at Flood Zone and tracks up in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
It might have been Tuesdays in Richmond and Wednesdays in Charlottesville.
Yeah, because I worked right across the street from the Flood Zone, so I would always step in there while they were playing. But
Wow.
there was like Boy Oh Boy, which became Fighting Gravity, ska band. There was Cracker, the Pat McGee Band, Car Bomb. A lot of people don't know GWAR is from Richmond. The Good Guys, Biorhythmo was a really cool Latin band. But I mean, it was a really interesting music scene in that there wasn't any one thing you could kind of pin this stylistically from the Richmond music scene on.
Very eclectic.
Yeah, and I think you're ironically, your style that I'm sure had some type of influence from that is pretty eclectic as well. I mean, if you go through your catalog of music, it's a pretty eclectic catalog.
Yeah, some bands just like they get together and they gel and they have a sound out of the box, you know what I mean? And we weren't like that, everybody was in different camps as far as musical, tastes or inspirations. And so there was a period where we were throwing all that into the pot, which creates something for sure, something new and unique, but is it necessarily working for you or not? And that's kind of some of the journey we had, was like, well, this is interesting, but I don't know if it's really like serving our audience. So it took a little bit of time to experiment and kind of find our stride, I think. And especially back in those early days in the Richmond scene that you're describing there, which I remember well, where there was, a lot of good clubs and bars that a lot of eclectic bands played in. We were just getting started and kind of still transitioning from being like a cover band to eventually like writing our own stuff, losing all of our college audience when we stopped playing covers and had to rebuild everything from the ground up, and so that journey from like 93, starting in 93 to like shifting to a original band, took about 8 years to kind of figure out.
What was the point? Was it when you got to your, I think it was Echo Echo that came out in like 01. What was the point though, where you felt like you'd made that transition from Richmond bar band to, hey, it's time to take this thing on the road, and we actually feel like we have the self-confidence to do that? I think there's something here.
Yeah, there was a lot of business around Virginia had a lot of schools, and back then there was a lot of opportunity to be hired to play live music. And when that kind of started drying up, campuses, started literally drying up, and, putting the clamp on campus parties, but then the culture was changing towards, DJ and house music and things like that. We were kind of forced to really get out of some of that and start looking towards the cities beyond Richmond or towns in Virginia, and start spiraling out from there. So we really did. We started local, and then we would add a a bar gig in another town, and then the weekends turned into Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then they turned into Wednesday through Saturday. But we'd race home and we'd work during the day, and then we'd run out as far as we could to play the next thing. But it wasn't really until we were kind of on our last leg, feeling like, well, we'd kind of done everything that a independent band can do without some extra pop. And about that time, the Boxer song on Echo Echo won some contests and got some kind of just surprising traction at a few radio stations in DC all the way out to Seattle. And it started connecting some dots for us and allowed us to start getting out on the road a little bit more legitimately. And that's when I felt like, that was like you said, 2001. So, it was already, again, like I said, like, kind of an 8-year kind of span of getting it going.
Yeah. And then you guys signed with Vanguard Records, and your Indian Summer record came out, which had Life Less Ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys kind of exploded. I mean, it was the proverbial like big hit for you guys. I mean, that was a big hit, and you ended up you have to explain this one to me. This is fucking crazy in my mind. How'd you end up on the Dr. Phil show? I mean,
we're like the only band that played the Dr. Phil show.
I think so, yeah.
That's true.
That's cool though. I mean, it's like Phil McGraw and me. What are you talking?
Yeah, that's really good. So when Indian Summer was released, and then we had kind of like a follow-up single that really plugged into some radio markets across the country. And now all of a sudden we're we go back to Indianapolis, after playing Roadhouse to like 30 people for a couple of years, and now we show up at a different venue and there's like 600 people, and we're like, because we're getting played on the radio, and we're like, this is great. Yeah, I don't.
Was that a reflection at all of being with a label for the first time? I mean, because sometimes they say that the support from a label is great, and some people tell you they'd much rather do it themselves. Or was it simply just you had starting to get radio play? And I mean, I know what it's like to go play for 11 people in the middle of nowhere, and it can be a little deflating at times, and then you all of a sudden get that hope breathed back into you when you show up and you've got a couple hundred people. And so what do you was it just kind of like a lot of different forces coming together organically?
It was. We were very fortunate with, I mean, it was a mix of being proactive and chasing, like back in when this is the infancy of the internet still, where all these .com sites had contests, and you could upload your songs and and win money and be in commercials, and so if you were proactive and you were like looking for those opportunities, and you would upload your song, and of course it would take like 20 minutes to upload a song and that kind of stuff. We kind of quilted things together just by hustling and working hard and having some lucky breaks with, first with the Boxer, which won the AMA contest, and then that got the attention of Vanguard, and they were saying, hey, we are interested, and we said, well, we're actually finishing up this record, which became Indian Summer. We recorded that on our own time and dime, and we licensed it to them, and then they were able to spin that into, I would say a moderate, hit at AAA radio and at Hot AC. And and certainly having that radio marketing, obviously helped us. But, being on a label is a risk. You basically trade one thing for the other. So
Sure.
do you want the marketing, and do you want to roll the dice with the radio? And, I think we just got really lucky with a good song that was pushed by some believers in the band in certain radio formats that had influence in the radio world, and really promoted the band. There were some program directors that really believed in the band and really went to bat for us. And Patty Morris at Hot AC for Vanguard she was great. She was tough. She's just like, play this, play this, play this. And, passion from a team does add value to, what we do. And so it's hard to find those people. You can spend your whole career kind of looking for them. And there's plenty of bands out there that are no longer with us because they couldn't crawl out of, some of those bad deals and, teams that, weren't fighting for you. But, that stuff's cyclical, and it's very hard to maintain that time and time again. And so the band really needs to be nimble and take the reins when it's time, because there's always going to be a time. When if you do have a hit, all of a sudden you have all this team up here, but when there's a dip, now you're holding all this up on, and it becomes very top heavy. So you have to find that kind of middle ground where there's tension, to be able to capitalize on that, but also assume control when you need to.
Yeah. So I can check that off. The success had nothing to do with Jeff Sadler's bus driving ability. Check. All right, we got that off. But then you talked about a series of kind of good things happening to you. I mean, there was the Red Rocks opportunity where you ended up being the featured band on the film on the Rocks at Red Rocks.
Right.
And then of course you get on a soundtrack, Curious George 2, which we've all seen and committed to memory, but I think you had a handful of songs. Yeah, you had a handful of songs, though, 6 songs maybe on that, and even a reboot of Life Less Ordinary, an acoustic version. So I'm sure those things also, from a momentum standpoint, were helpful in just kind of keeping that momentum.
Yeah, when Curious George came, like the producers, Universal called and said, hey, we were using your song as a temp holder while we're making this sequel to Curious George, but now we like it and we want to use it, but we want to change the lyrics. And then we were like, yeah, okay, I'll change a verse, I'm down with that for the movie. And then they were like, well, and then they came back and said, hey, do you want to just like write all the songs for it? Like, sure. So those opportunities pop up because, but the song that they were using as the temp holder was Life Less Ordinary, but it was an acoustic version from a radio interview that we had done at one of the stations across the country. So they had gotten a recording from us just being out at the radio station. So, those things do kind of fold into each other. And you're not really sure kind of where that's going to come from,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the new record, Time is a Playground. I think the first thing we need to ask you is, why 10 years? What were you guys just doing other things, taking care of life? Or was it a very purposeful thing where you needed to take some time and take a break?
Yeah, well, both. There was definitely some, life stuff, as the guys got older and they had kids and the, families expand. Your model shifts a little bit, but really, within that 10 years, we did have, we released 2 5-song EPs.
Right.
We released a 27-song, Blu-ray, of stuff from our catalog, which was a way bigger project than I had anticipated. Did a few other things. So, but back in 2013, we released two full-length albums back to back with 6 months apart. And it's like we've never worked harder. And I was like, I don't know why we chose to do that, but we did. And in hindsight, we probably should have not done that and just spaced things out. But we were on a kick at that point where we were like, let's make a recording every 8 months, because as you get these opportunities, the radio thing or the Curious George or this or that. Meanwhile, your last single maybe didn't do as well, and then you part ways with the manager that you do have, and so there's other things going on that you have to adjust to. It's not just the band's just here ready to write and record. There's other stuff to deal with, and so that stuff can take time. Being on the road 80 days a year, which is down from what we used to back in the radio days. We were doing 200 dates, 150 dates, I don't know, way more than we can do now, because with the families and all that, just it's not a good life balance. So 10 years can go by pretty quickly. We launched this project right as the pandemic was hitting.
Yeah.
It was a Kickstarter. We were like, we're going to do this thing. Record's going to come out next year. Well, we didn't realize that the pandemic was going to be what the pandemic was. I mean, it was just kind of like, it was just coming onto the scene. And so we really had to shift our energies to, our business and touring and making sure everybody's got payroll, and, it became a different priority rather than me just going away and writing.
Yeah.
And so, that kicked us off schedule by a couple of years. And so, with that in the mix, and the fact that we had released those two albums back to back in 2013, and we also did 3 re-recordings of our previous catalog within that span.
Yeah.
So there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 7 projects that we released in that course. It just wasn't a full-blown 12-song album.
And of course, I mean, with digital media, the nature of how much we record these days tends to ebb and flow, and sometimes it's just dropping singles every couple months or what have you. And
yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So, the new album is interesting to me in that it feels grittier to me. The guitar in it feels grittier to me throughout, which I really like. It's even if you listen to the song that I guess will be the first single, although it's not listed as that on streaming services, Backmask 1983. There's a lot of gritty guitar on there that I was not expecting.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the consistency of it throughout the entire album, because I find that like in your past records, you might have, one song here, one song there, one's acoustic, what have you, but this whole record seemed much grittier to me. What do you feel like that was the case? And if so, what's driving that? Is it just like the evolution of the band or what have you?
No, stylistically, I wanted to, the 2 EPs that we'd released, over the last few years were, strictly acoustic kind of, they're still kind of pumped up the way we do things, but it, had fiddle and mandolin and banjo and, string stuff. So it was a more folk rock oriented thing. And I wanted to get an album out that kind of rocked a little bit more, and, featured the guitar, and I wanted songs. I wanted something that felt meaty and had lyrically and thematically had some weight to it. But I also wanted to have the muscle, and I wanted to just I wanted like catchy, like guitar hooks, and like, I just wanted it to sound kind of catchy, muscly, and meaningful. Those are kind of the things that I wanted to kind of do. So, some of these songs were old demos that I'd kind of like really, pulled my ear, but I couldn't find my way, into the story. So I would work on them every now and again. And Backmask has been floating around for 15 years, and I kind of knew where I wanted to go with it, but I just wasn't able to get into it. And so I finally was able to kind of figure it out. But it took kind of going back and forth over a long time, until recently. But that demo like sounded like a cross between, AC/DC and the Cars to me, which I loved. It's like, so let's just lean into that for that one, and where does that want to take you? But Carter's got a lot of talent on the guitar, and Terry as well, and some hooks in there from some of these demos that I just wanted to utilize, and just get away from the mandolin and the banjo for a little bit. And because this record kind of sounds more like what might be from Echo Echo or Indian Summer, just in that kind of the grit, maybe a little more of that grizz.
Yeah. Well, Barry, I know you got to run, so thank you so much for coming on the Loadout Music Podcast, talking about the new Carbon Leaf record coming out in late September. Wish you the best of luck, and it's always good to talk to a Richmond homie.
Yeah, right on. It's good to run into you online, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, hosted by Atomic Junkshot frontman Aaron Perlett. Find all of our episodes and more at loadoutmusic.com.